Yep.
Okay, well today, thanks everyone for joining us. I'm Paul from the Large and Public Library. We have Anne Swaim with us today to talk about the basics of birding. Anne, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Paul. I'm really glad to be here. And hey, everybody, great to do this even through Zoom. So what I've done, I'm from Sawmill River, Audubon, and there's actually a lot of different Audubon groups up and down the Hudson River. These are the Audubon and birding groups from Albany all the way down to New York City. So I want to give a special shout out to Bronx River Sound Shore Audubon, which is in the Larchmont area. So even though we're sister chapters, I'm over in the northwest corner of the county. So Bronx River Sound Shore Audubon has some great programs you might want to check out too. So just Google them, BRSS Audubon, and see what they do. Some of their programs on Zoom we co-sponsor. And also want to give a shout out to the credits. So what I've pulled together for you in this very quick, it's going to be a fast-paced program about birding, are some still pictures. You can see sources there, and some video and sound clips, which is always good to have when you're talking about birds that move and sing. And you can see the sources for those here on the screen as well. And hopefully, Paul, I think we were able to send out this resource sheet. And if we haven't, we will afterwards. And this is going to be the key links I'm talking about tonight if you want to go deeper, because this is only an hour program and there's so much to explore. Whether you're a very beginner birder, you haven't really tried it out much yet, or you're an expert birder, there's always more to learn. So I want to give you resources no matter where you are in that. Yeah. How's that sound? Are you hearing a flute-like call? Paul, can you nod? Are you hearing a flute-like call there? Does that sound good?
Yeah, I hear it. Yep.
Thank you. I wanted to be sure to check that. We can edit that out of the recording. So yeah, the thing about birds that have caught people's hearts and minds, of course, is that they make sound. So we forgot to say, if you have any questions, raising your hand or questions in chat, leave those in chat and we'll save those to the end, okay? And so wood thrush, cousin of the robin that lives in the wooded areas of our county, certainly around Larchmont, has this amazing flute-like sound. It's only here though, May to around September. And right now, the wood thrushes that might keep our forests healthy here in Larchmont and in Westchester area are down in Belize. So birds tie us across the seasons. They tie the continents together with their migration. Some people can live in this area their whole lives and never notice a scarlet tanager. That's because they live up in a canopy. They're smaller than cardinals and even more red. And they need a place where there's 10 acres of canopy touching at top. So not a divided forest, but an intact forest, like we might have in some of our parks. And where scarlet tanagers live, trees are healthier because they eat the bugs that eat the trees. Another neotropical migrant right now down in Central and South America, the scarlet tanager. So if you look at a bird book from 1950, 1940, they'll tell you that a pileated woodpecker is shy, retiring, and hard to find in deep woods. Well, that's changed because the habitat's changed, because the forests of Westchester, many of which the forests around our houses, the suburban forests, many of which grew up from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, post-war, are now big forests, big trees. And so people are seeing pileated woodpeckers, this largest woodpecker in North America, right in their backyard. Pileus means crest. It has a little crest on its head. So birds in their habitat are like your fingers laced together. A blue jay can live in downtown Manhattan, Central Park, Pocket Park somewhere. It could also live in the Adirondacks. So it's a generalist if the food and the shelter are there and the combination it needs for habitat. But this bird, about the size of a blue jay, is a kind of falcon called a kestrel, and it can only live in grassland. So some birds are really specialists. This kestrel is eating a grasshopper it caught on the Croton Point Park grassland. Kind of neat, right? Like a hot dog eating it. So birds tie us to habitats. They also tie us to seasons. Some birds we have here in Westchester, only in the winter. This is their Florida. So at the reservoir, Larchmont Reservoir, in the Long Island Sound, in the New York City reservoirs out in the Hudson, in October, you'll start to see these birds appear. Smaller than mallards, the usual park duck, and they're diving ducks. They go all the way under the water, black and white bufflehead. They nest way up at the Hudson Bay or far, far north part of Eastern Canada. They come here for the winter. So they're kind of marking the seasons. Right now they're out in our waters, but come March, April, they'll start to disappear and slip back north. Here's something people did during the pandemic in their backyards. They cut an orange in half and stuck it outside, and they might have gotten this orange bird if they did. In May, it's the Baltimore Oriole, another rainforest bird that just comes here for the spring and summer to nest and eat our bugs, feeds its young almost an entirely insect diet. So whatever we put down on our backyard or around our businesses is going to affect the health of Baltimore Orioles because they're nesting breeding birds in our area. So the main thing about Westchester that I think is just amazing is how birdy it is. If you look at a map, you can see why. The county is a giant rest area in the middle of two major bird highways. The Hudson River, birds follow that north and south in the spring and the fall, and the Long Island Sound on the other side opening up to the Atlantic coast, which is another major flyway. So we're right in the middle of the two. So we get a lot of fall and spring migrants. Plus we get winter stopovers like the bufflehead I mentioned. Plus we get birds that come from the south to nest here, like the Oriole. So that's a lot of birds. You can see another picture of this here. We're right in the middle of a big flyway. The Atlantic flyway comes together right here. And another measure of the bird richness in our area is how many nesting birds are here, how many breeding birds. And look how lit up the lower Hudson is, including Westchester. Lots and lots of birds here. So people learn birds kind of by sight, same way some of us learn to read. You know how you have sight words you learn, like cat, dog, bird. Some people have sight birds, like they'll know, okay, this red bird is a cardinal. That bluebird we saw before that was bluish is actually a blue jay. So they learn some birds by sight. But if you want to go deeper, if you want to dig deeper into the mysteries of birds and learn how to ID birds, you have to be able to say, well, more than that, like how you know this is a cardinal. So I want to teach you a little bit of the tricks tonight that birders use, not necessarily to memorize different species by sight on the screen tonight, but to learn how we can figure out what it is, even when it's a bird we've never seen before. So female cardinal on the left, male on the right, as many of you know. Many of you may not know that cardinals are southern birds. They moved into New York in the early 1900s, and it was kind of a big deal to see them. Big conical beak tells you that they're seed eaters, and she's camouflaged. So if the female of a kind of bird is a very different color than the male, that tells you a secret. That tells you that the bird builds its nest low or even on the ground. So the female is camouflaged. Cardinals build their nests probably about knee level in the shrubbery in your neighborhood. So she needs to be camouflaged. Another view here. So the other big thing about birds, before we start sorting out how to tell them apart, is that they're the most visible wildlife on the planet. We've already talked about some reasons why. They fly, they make noise, they come in lots of colors. And a key thing is they're found year round. There are some birds out every season of the year. And that's different than every other kind of wildlife, especially because they're largely out during the day, right? With the exception of the owls and some others. So they're the most visible wildlife on the planet. So when we walk into a habitat, we can listen and look to see what birds are there any time of year. And the presence or absence of birds tells us how healthy that habitat is. Is it there to support life with food and shelter and water for the species that need it? So birds in their habitat are like your fingers laced together, right? So many of you know right away that this is a water bird, even if you didn't see the water in the picture. It lives in watery habitats with long legs for wading, a long neck for probing, and a spear-like bill for frogs and fish, and sometimes even mice in a field. So this is the great blue heron. It's not really blue like a blue jay. Sometimes it looks really gray, but it's probably the biggest wading bird many of us will see around here. 3 feet tall, wings about 6 feet wide, wing spread, that's called. And it's not going to decide tomorrow just to change its habits and go live in a hole in a tree like an owl, is it? Its legs, its feet, its stomach, what it can digest, how it knows to hunt, are all for the habitat it's in. So birds in their habitat are closely linked. Isn't that great? So that's the song of the eastern bluebird, New York State bird. Some of you may know of Sandra Morrissey, who is pretty famous in Westchester for really bringing back the bluebirds here, south of 287 and many places north, especially in golf courses, because she's a golfer. So this is a cousin of the robin and that wood thrush we saw before. It's another kind of thrush, but blue on the back, red on the front, and a white belly. And it can only nest inside holes. So a robin could build a cup nest with mud. Maybe some of you have seen that in a tree. But a bluebird needs to be inside a cavity, an old woodpecker hole, or a specially designed box of the right size hole and shape. And we almost ran out of bluebirds in New York State for a bunch of reasons, not the least of which is pesticides, because they eat a lot of bugs. But now they've come back because of bluebird boxes largely. So birding covers a lot of different things: photography, art, ornithology, what makes a bird, keeping track of birds, which is called listing. It's kind of a competitive thing, and really just enjoying the birds in your neighborhood, in your backyard. So all of that counts as birding. So I'm just going to give you some clues tonight of how people do birding. And then if you want to go deeper, I hope that you will. So thinking about backyard birding first, what makes a bird a bird? We're going to look at ID tips, going to talk about some healthy habitats for birds, and how birders are making a difference and how you can too, particularly next weekend with a great backyard bird count. And then again, resources to go deeper. I want to make sure we always mention that. So flight, right? That catches our eyes and our attention, particularly something like this. Could be as much as 8 feet, the wingspread of a bald eagle, which has been reintroduced in New York State and is just amazing how it came back. And to see one grab with its talons a fish in the water, that's extraordinary. So the flight is what most people would think of with birds, but of course there are some birds that don't fly, and there are some other wildlife, birds are wildlife. There's some other wildlife like butterflies and bats that fly that aren't birds. Birds can make sounds. There's its name. Do you hear how the chickadee got its name, right? So this bird is smaller than a sparrow, one of our yardstick birds, and is named for its call. So birds make sounds. They make calls as a sound fence in the spring to show where their territory is, to keep birds of the same kind out. That's what a song does, a sound fence. And then they have calls year round. So chickadee-dee-dee is its call, and that's what the chickadee is named for. And then birds also lay eggs. Somebody else will say that's another reason that bird is a bird. But there's some other creatures that lay eggs, right? The amphibians in the water, like these wood frogs, or the box turtle, which lays sort of a leathery eggs in the ground, covers them up. But neither of these spend any time with their young. So that distinguishes birds. They build a different kind of nest for every kind of bird. Here's a cardinal nest tucked in the shrubs. And the egg size and shape and pattern is different for every kind of bird too. Kind of speckled here for camouflage. But the one thing birds have that no other wildlife has, and no other animals on the planet have, are feathers. And feathers are extraordinary. They're made out of the same stuff as your fingernails. And they're really, scientists would consider them to be kind of a modified scale. And they're really quite beautiful. They were almost the end of some birds, and some of you know that story. These amazing breeding plumes on egrets became the rage. And egrets, this tall white heron, egret is French word for feather, were almost made extinct, particularly in Florida, until a group was formed, started by some women in Massachusetts, actually. They named it after a famous painter of American birds, Audubon. And they got it against the law. No one person can use up all our birds just for their own profit anymore. Those are our wildlife laws. The wildlife belongs to all of us. So that was the start of Audubon, the feathers. And the egret is the symbol of that. But let's look at feathers a moment, because they're going to help us with ID. Even if you've been watching birds a long time, it's interesting to learn more about the parts of them because it can help with ID and understanding them. The feathers we find the most are the tail and the wing feathers. You know, those kind have a stick down the middle, the rachis it's called. But there's so many other feathers on a bird that shape its contour and help it sense things and give it color and loft. So take a look at where these feathers plug into the bird. The wing and tail feathers are the flight feathers again, but there are lots and lots of contour feathers, like the shingles of a roof, all over the bird's body. And then underneath that is a whole nother layer of down and semi-plumes. So here's a question to consider. You can put it in chat if you want, if Paul can watch it. How many feathers, roughly, do you think are on a robin? I'm going to put a little robin song on while we think about this. You got any guesses? You can call them out, Paul, and I'll say whether they're high or low. Anybody have a guess?
None so far.
Okay.
20.
20. Okay. Nope. Lots more than 20.
200.
Lots more than
340.
Lots
1,000.
more. Lots more than 1,000. Lots more. Lots more than 1,000. Who's got another?
3,000. 10,000. 500,000.
Okay, we've got it bracketed between 3 and 10. Somebody want to make a guess between those two? You've bracketed it somewhere more than 3 and less.
7,000. 5,000.
Right about there. Right about 5,000 or 6,000 feathers are on a robin. Is that crazy? It's even crazier to think somebody did count them. But yeah, so most of them are these little tiny shingle feathers. We all have kind of a general idea how big a robin is, hopefully. Otherwise, look around for some. They're here in the winter too. So robins are smaller than crows, but bigger than sparrows, right? More about that in a moment. And they have between 5,000 and 6,000 feathers. Now, how can that be? Well, here's another cousin of the wood thrush, the bluebird, the robin, yet another thrush that lives in Westchester called a hermit thrush. They're the kind here in the winter. They have a red tail that contrasts with their, whoa, without the feathers, that's a freaky looking bird. You might recognize a meal if you're a meat eater. So the wing and tail feathers, and then all those contour feathers, right? That really makes the bird. It's kind of interesting to see that happen. So here's something kind of cool. If you find a feather, you can actually identify it using the Feather Atlas. And this is part of the Fish and Wildlife Service Forensic Library. It's used in crime solving. And there's different entries here for all the different feathers of North American birds. Here's an example of the entry for wild turkey tail feathers. We get sent pictures of these a lot because people find them and they're very dramatic looking. Tail feathers tend to be squared at the top. And then these are the wing feathers from wild turkeys. And can you see how they're shaped like a knife with a skinny edge on one side and a wide edge of the rachis over here? So you can impress your friends and amaze your enemies when you pick up a wing feather and see it shaped like this knife with a skinny edge and a long edge. Turn the dark side up and you can figure out this is a right wing feather. These are all right wing feathers. Do you follow me on that? I'll show you another illustration of that. See how here's the rachis, the stick down the middle. Here's one side of the feather, all skinny, the part that cuts the wind. And here's a wider trailing edge. Here's a better look on that. You see these primary feathers? They're the first feathers that cut the wind. That's why they're called primaries. And see how one side is skinny? So this is a left wing, okay? And then the secondaries are back here. They're more even on either side of the rachis. And then there's all kinds of other feathers, the coverts that kind of protect the wing and give it shape. And hey, give it streamlining like a jet wing to cut through the air. Something that happens with feathers, and as you get more advanced in birding, you'll look for this, is feather wear. A lot of times the white parts wear off first. It's actually a wing feather from a ring-billed gull, and it actually changes its appearance before it gets to its next molt. And birds have 1 or 2 molts a year, some complete, some not, where they change their feathers. You know, dogs, cats shed their fur, birds molt their feathers. Here's something else cool about birds, and it has to do with how they can predict storms. No kidding. They off their lungs, they have all these air sacs. It has to do with the efficiency of breathing for the hard work of flying, increases their blood flow. It also makes them extraordinarily sensitive to air pressure changes. And if you watch, when the barometer is starting to fall, the gulls, ring-billed gulls, will come in off the water into like parking lots, right? And your feeder, or if you're around any kind of feeder, before or during a low pressure system, it'll be full of birds or much more busier with birds. So birds can sense a low pressure system coming through. Another cool thing about bird biology, before we talk more about how these connect to ID here, is that their songbirds have a different structure in their throat. We have a larynx I'm using now to talk. They have a syrinx. And what this means is they can actually make 2 notes at the same time. They can sing in harmony with themselves. So really complex sounds are able to be made by these birds with a syrinx. And here, this next slide is yet another thrush that's found around here, and really a beautiful song. See if we can. You hear that? You hear the spiral? This bird is singing two notes at the same time, crossing over each other and spiraling down. It's called Aviri. It's our smallest thrush, and it lives, a lot of Aviris live in Westchester in the woodlands. Again, a bird that comes in May and leaves in the fall. Very neat sound. So there is other animals, other wildlife that have beaks, if you will. Certainly a turtle. It actually gets called the Hawksbill Turtle. It's an endangered species. But when you look at a bird, you can actually see how it makes its living by what's on its face. Their bill, as ornithologists would call them, or beak, the beak or bill, is all different shapes depending how they eat and what they eat, right? And it can be a huge tip for ID, whether you're looking at a seed-eating bird like a cardinal or a grosbeak. You can hear that German word there, big beak. A little tweezer bug-plucking bird like a warbler, a chiseling bird like a woodpecker, a spear-faced bird like a heron. This bird sieves the water for plants and animals, and so forth. So it can be really neat to study that, and that's a clue. So when you're looking at the head, you also want to look at the feet, because birds have all different feet, all that adaptations, depending how they live and where they live. So that's another good clue for you. And I'm going to put a couple of these together right now in an exercise for you. So this specialized kind of foot here is called zygodactyl. Isn't that a great word? Dactyl having to do with the toes, and zygo is zigzaggy. So ospreys that catch fish also have zygodactyl feet, 2 and 2. Most birds are 3 and 1. You can see that. Long toes for a heron, talons for an eagle. So we're going to look at some key tips for ID, put some of these ideas together. We finished what makes bird a bird, and we're right on time here. Great way to learn about the different birds up close, if you can, is to be around a bird feeder. Because we can see the birds up close. Bird feeding is mostly for people, to be honest, to see the birds and enjoy them. But on a February day with an ice storm, where it seems to get dark so early and things all ice up like we had, there's no question that a feeder can be an edge of survival for our winter birds. So here's an interesting story. The whole sorting out of birds actually happened in Westchester. First time anywhere in the world. No, I'm serious. The very first idea of a field guide began in Westchester County. It began with Roger Tory Peterson, who was living in New York City and working as a commercial artist. He wasn't doing too great, to be honest. He was doing much better with his birding, and he was with a group of friends out at Croton Point along the Hudson River, helping them to sort out geese. And his friend said, you know, you don't really know this birding stuff, and you're a really good artist. Why don't you make a book of birds to help people ID them? And Roger Tory Peterson didn't think that was a great idea, mainly because it was in the middle of the Depression. Didn't think that was going to sell. But a couple of his friends helped him out, staked the money, and the book sold out and sold out and sold out in multiple editions. And the whole idea of a field guide, a book you take into the field, was born. And the first series of those was Peterson Field Guides. Great story, right? So the idea of a field mark originated with Roger Tory Peterson. And that's like a really obvious thing that you can tell about the bird in the field to help you tell it from other birds of its kind. Do you see the arrows? Right? So if you're seeing a bunch of geese and swans go by, what can you look for to see which one is which? Right? That's the idea of a field mark. So that's pretty obvious stuff. That's size, shape, and color and patterns. Those are the general field marks. But to really get good in birding and to really sort out birds, you also really want to use the other clues that a lot of people forget. What's the bird doing? And where are you and when are you? That's huge. Where are you? Are you in New York versus Oregon? Are you in a field versus the edge of the ocean? And then when are you? Is it October? Is it April? Is it February? That tells you a big clues of what birds to expect and are likely there. And then sound. People forget about that, but we can hear 360, right? We can only see forward and side a little bit. So these are often forgotten. I'm going to give you quick examples of each of these. Yes, we're good on time here. First of all, size and shape. Birders use a couple of yardstick or meter sticks, if you will, birds. Think about how big a sparrow is, how big a robin is, how big a crow is. And a lot of bird descriptions will say, and you might have noticed me using that tonight, a pileated woodpecker is crow size. A kestrel, that falcon, is robin size. The chickadee is actually smaller than a sparrow. Did you hear that? So those are ways that you can learn birding just by going right in your neighborhood to a park, right in your backyard. If you have a backyard, not everybody does. Any of the local county parks or refuges, go and just watch the birds you can see and get better at judging their size and what their names are. And then when you see new birds, like a blue jay is smaller than a crow, but bigger than a robin. Cedar Wax Wing, which is beautiful, picture later, smaller than a robin, but bigger than a sparrow. So you see how that goes. You see how that goes. So here's a question for chat. Don't name this bird yet. I know some of you know this bird. Didn't used to be in Westchester either. It's another bird that's come up from the south. The thing to ask, though, are the questions on the screen. This is how we start to learn birding. Not just to learn a bird and memorize a name that goes with it, but to ask ourselves, what do we notice first? What about the shape of the bill and the feet? And then about the behavior. Anything in chat, Paul, that people want to share?
Not yet.
Okay, that's cool. Some of you are usually, one thing we know about adult learners is they tend to be more inhibited. They don't always type right in the way sometimes students will. Well, I know we got some students out there too. So think about, what do you notice first about this bird in terms of color?
A redhead.
Excellent.
I have one daily at my theater. Okay, a zebra pattern.
Excellent. Yeah, look at these black and white stripies here. That's the only woodpecker around here that has these like big horizontal solid
pointed beak, long, strong beak.
Good. Yeah, that's a chisel beak. Woodpeckers peck into trees to eat the bugs in there. This one's licking them out with its tongue.
The way it's perched on the tree.
Yeah, using its tails to prop it up. And see the zygodactyl feet here, 2 and 2. Anything else?
Someone's saying, are they think they're from the south?
Yeah, so they used to not be here, and they've moved north. They have a funny name called a red-bellied. Yeah, gray legs. Good observation. They're called a red-bellied woodpecker. Because of it, we're lying on its back. You can see it has a little red. A lot of people want to call it the red-headed, which makes sense. But we already had a red-headed woodpecker named. This one's pretty rare around here, more common to the south and west. This is the red-headed woodpecker. But the red-bellied woodpecker is one that'll come to feeders and get seed and then store the seed in the bark, and cache it. Okay, so here's another example of trying something different than just learning a bird by sight. Okay, so here's a northern cardinal again. But if it didn't have any color, how would you know this is a northern cardinal? Without any color, how do you know this is a northern cardinal?
Mohawk. The mohawk.
Good for you. The mohawk. Yeah, excellent. Look at that crest up there, the big triangle on its head. Now I can put that down and lower it. So can blue jays.
The beak. Someone said it was their school mascot.
Oh, excellent. That's how you would know that. Yeah. So big triangle beak here.
The markings around the beak.
Excellent. You don't always notice, excuse me, let me go back. You don't always notice that black mask with all this blazy red looking at you, but this is called high contrast pattern. And particularly for those of you who go a little deeper on warblers, like fall warblers and immature birds, you're looking for areas of high and low contrast to help ID birds. So it's always good to look for. And here you can see a high contrast pattern on this bird, even without color. Okay. Here's another secret for you. A cardinal has a really long tail compared to where its wings end. And that's something you always want to notice about birds. Where do the wing feathers end and where do the tail feathers end? And if it's a really long tail, that tells you this is a bird that lives in the shrub layer. It's a bird that makes a lot of quick, tight turns. So thrashers, mockingbirds, the birds that eat them, Cooper's hawk, sharp-shinned hawk, both have long, thin tails to go dashing around corners. Kind of interesting. So here are 2 different species of woodpeckers. Okay, both come around to feeders. They actually need different kinds of trees, though. A hairy woodpecker needs hardwood trees, what are called hard snags, freshly new dead trees. And downy woodpeckers like soft snags, the kind of standing dead tree you could push your finger in almost. So how will we tell them apart? Now they look really obvious. This isn't a mother and a baby, by the way. And that's something people get really mixed up on birds. because they see, like, say, a duck or a goose in the park that has little fuzzies running after it, little babies, and they think all birds do that. That's actually really unusual. For almost all the birds out there in the world, the babies are the same size as the adults when they leave the nest. Okay? They're the same size or even heavier than the adults when they leave the nest. So this isn't baby and grown up. These are two different species. It's easy to tell them apart when they're next to each other. This is called a hairy woodpecker. This one's called a downy. But how would you tell them if you just saw one? Well, you look for clues on the one bird's body. In this case, the width of this bill, the length of this bill, I should say, is more than half the width of the head. And on the downy, this little bill is barely half the width of the head. Do you see that? Like if you flip the bill around and laid it up against the head. The other thing to look for in the east, there's a little spur here to help you ID. So you might get both of these around where you walk and look for birds, or maybe if you have a feeder or watch a feeder. So look for that bill length and see if you can sort out a downy from a hairy. I want to give you that as an example of tricks that birds look for, birders look for and learn to ID a bird, even if you're looking at one of two similar birds. You need to find something on the one bird's body that can help you tell its name, right? And then an ID puzzle like this is just another example. And we get sent pictures of first winter hawks all the time. Excuse me. Because these big poofy brown and white stripy hawks show up in backyards in the winter around here. They're just learning how to be a hawk. It's their first winter. They're full grown, same size as the adults, but they don't have adult color plumage yet. For these hawks, it takes just a year or two, and then they'll look like the adult birds. But they show up in the yard and people aren't quite sure what they are. So the first thing you do is look for where the tail ends compared to where the wing ends, just like we did on that cardinal. And on two of these kind of hawks, see how they have different front patterns, a lot of white here, streaked all the way up to the neck here. On two of these hawks, it's a very short tail compared to the wings. And they're pretty stocky looking, the big square shoulders like a swimmer or a football player. Short and stocky hawks. And both of these kind of hawks eat mammals. Just kind of drop down on them. But this hawk, let me turn him around, has a long, thin tail, right? Let me go back. The wing ends here and the tail just keeps going. So that's a whole different kind of hawk. If you can tell one group of hawks from another group of hawks, you've done really well. And the way to do that is to look at that tail length, okay? So these are actually a red-shouldered hawk, a red-tailed hawk, and a Cooper's hawk. A Cooper's hawk is a kind of hawk that'll chase birds at a feeder. Red tail and red shoulder often go for mammals first and soar in the air slowly or drop from a perch. So 3 first winter raptors, not to teach you so that you're like, okay, I know it now, but to show you the clues that we use and the clues that resource materials you'll see use to sort out these birds. But like 9 out of 10 hawks that people ask me about in Westchester are the red-tailed hawk. This is the most abundant bird of prey in the county. Red, like brick red on the adult bird. See that? And again, wingtips almost to the tail, very short tail. Big blazy white chest in all plumages. A lot of times they'll sit by the parkways facing the summer sun, the winter sun rather, to the south. You'll see this blaze of white. If you drive from here to Albany, you'll have, like, we play a game. You can get up to 20 different red tails on the side of the road once you start looking. But remember, the other clues we said we would do is behavior. So with hawks, it's sometimes easier to identify them when they're flying because they fly differently. Those thick-bodied hawks, also called buteos, red shoulder, red tail, short-tailed hawks, they fly in big, wide, swoopy circles up in the air. This is a red tail with a white chest and dark leading edge. There's a little belly band there. So they fly one way, and those long-tailed hawks, let me go back and get that, the Cooper's hawk flies another way. Do you see that flap, flap, flap sail? Look for this. It soars, but then it does this quick, jerky flapping in between. And you can see how long that tail is, right? Quite different. So this is a Cooper's hawk flying across the sky. Kind of long, thin wings, long, thin tail, squared off in the front. For those of you know, that makes it different than a sharp-shinned hawk, its cousin. Got a head projection there too. So remember, not just color, pattern, shape, but how the bird moves, how it acts, right? Let me check the time here. I think I'm going to jump past this example of blackbirds. So we're thinking about field marks and shape And one thing that you can do to get better at birding is learn silhouettes. And this was inside the first copy of the Peterson Field Guide to Birds, and you can find this online to test yourself with the answers, because a lot of birds you can learn just from their shape. For example, a mourning dove up here with this long, thin tail, often on the wires. Blue jay with its mohawk, there's another crest, and its rounded tail. A grackle, great big bill, and also a big, long, good tail. It's another big blackbird around here. So as you dig into ID, try to find 3 reasons of ID: size, shape, color. Don't just learn birds by sight, but especially if you think you found a rare bird or you're teaching somebody else, don't just teach them by sight, but teach them the pieces, right? Size, shape, color, behavior, habitat, general impression. If you get better, you start to look out the window and say, yep, that was a blue jay that just flew by. You get this general impression of size and shape, which is a term from fighter pilots to identify different birds, and it's true for birding too. Always location, always time of year. So if you do the backyard bird count, make sure you're not identifying a bird that's only found in Oregon, right? Or make sure you haven't decided that you've seen a bird in your backyard that's only found here in the summer. It can happen, but like is used in medicine, don't hear hoofbeats and think zebras. Go for the most likely one. And then this is hard for adults. A lot of adults discover birding later in life, and they might be experts at other things in their life, whether it's raising a family or doing some profession. And it's hard to be humble and teachable when you're such an expert in another area of your life. That's true for people of all ages, isn't it? So a very famous birder said how many birds he gets wrong every year. That's because he's identifying a lot of birds. So be ready to be corrected and to learn. And the best way to learn about what to expect where is to use eBird. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Behavior and time of year, don't forget that. Here's an example of how those two go together. Ducks. A lot of the ducks we have in the winter are diving ducks. They go straight under the water to catch their food. Bufflehead and this crazy looking bird, hooded merganser. A lot of the birds we have in the summer are dabbling ducks that just tilt their bodies to feed. You've probably seen that, like the wood duck, a lot of those at Larchmont Reservoir too. So again, seasonality is what we call it, seasonality, which birds to expect when. So with birds, you can always check what's called a range map. Check this out. This is true for plants too, you know, planting zones, some of you know about that. So we would expect Baltimore Orioles to be nesting in this red area. They'll be here in May to September. We would expect to only see them fall in spring when they're migrating in the yellow area. And here's where our Baltimore Orioles are right now, in the blue, right? I had a chance to go to Belize many years ago, and I was there in November, and I saw a lot of Baltimore Orioles. Belize is right here. And I was wondering how many of them were from Westchester that I was seeing. But here's a dynamic view of the same map as we move through this topic here. This is June, July, August, September, October, November, December. Yeah, what was that? That was millions of data points from birders putting their data into eBird. So with eBird, for the first time, we can actually trace the movement of birds across the continent, the relative abundance of a particular species of birds in different months of the year. Do you see that? How they all flood up into the continent and then flood back down, a veritable river of birds. It's really extraordinary. And many of them, when they come up, they do a trans-Gulf migration, which is extraordinary too. And here we are in New York, and whoosh, all our Orioles go back south. Very cool. So sound is another one. You can see why a jay. Oh, bugle note. They have that one too. Killdeer. See its name? See its name? This one, oh my gosh, this bird is so loud, male and female. They're wrens, they're about sparrow size, and they're here year round if the weather isn't too harsh. Male and female both sing, and you might have them in your neighborhood. Some people say it's cheeseburger, cheeseburger. Other people say it's tea kettle, tea kettle. See what you think. That's a loud call. That is a loud call. So listen for them. Carolina wrens are found all around our neighborhoods now. All right, so I talked about songs and calls, so I'm going to go quickly here. I want to talk just real quickly about healthy habitats and then how you can make a difference with the bird count this coming weekend. Something weird happened right before the pandemic. And so when the pandemic happened, you know, we got into the spring there and everything was all about the pandemic. This report kind of got buried. This report at 3billionbirds.org. But at the same time, what you see on the screen started to happen. With everybody shut up in their houses and not being able to go places, birding took off like crazy because people found out that listening to bird calls and songs was actually pretty neat. Decreased stress, and watching nature, even watching a cat video on YouTube, lights up different parts of our brain than otherwise. We're kind of wired to enjoy and to watch animals, including birds. So at 3billionbirds.org is a story that we'll talk about in a moment, but also ideas for what you can do to help birds, to make sure that they have understory, and that's a bit of a challenge, to see how bird feeding fits into the picture. It's more for us to see all these kind of birds up close, although, as I said, it can help on a winter day. Even better is planting the native plants that birds need, because they have the insects that birds eat. I do like bird feeders though, and we actually have them here where I'm talking from at Prine Sanctuary. We get purple finches rarely. What people call purple finches around here are almost always house finches with their brown stripy sides. But what we started to do was actually to put up a feeder cam so that we could watch the birds here all the time. And I'm going to do something here just as a quick break before we come into the home stretch on this. And what I think I need to do is to go back to the program. Let me go back to the program and hit escape. I'm going to stop the share a moment, and I see all you there. Hello, hello. And I'm going to start the share again because I want to show you, I want to show you a, if I can, this, hide the controls. There it is. I got off a bit. At our website, at our sanctuaries, you can go see the Prine feeder cam. So this is actually a camera that's on 24/7 on some feeders. That's what it looks like right now. It's dark, right? But sometimes you see raccoons and other things there. But let me back it up. Hey, this was 4/28 today. There's a downy woodpecker. You can tell it's a male with a red on the back of the head. So you can spend some time, if you don't have a feeder of your own, watching feeder cams. There's a tufted titmouse that's come in there to grab some sunflower seeds. And I don't actually know what's, oh, here's some house finches. There's the female who's all brown and the male. So I don't know exactly what's going to show up here because I didn't review all this. But you can go to feeder cams and actually watch to see what shows up live, which is a very cool thing to do, actually. And that's a little bit of what we do with the Great Backyard Bird Count. Now let me pause that and let me see if I can find, did you get a chance to see that? Were you able to see the cam at all? Just nod your head if so.
Yeah, we saw it. Yep.
Excellent. Good. All right. I'm just trying to find my way back to the, let me do escape and stop the share. Excellent. Great. Oh, you did see the cam. Good. All right. So let me just do a couple final thoughts here because we want to save time for your questions and comments. Just some ideas that you can help birds, whether you have property of your own or whether you can influence the property of a school or a company or elsewhere. A big deal is to the whole native plant revolution that's happening, right? Some of you know about that. For too long, we've planted plants that were imported from other countries, and they looked pretty, but they didn't attract the insects. And without the insects, they weren't feeding our wildlife, including our young birds. So here's a great picture of a cedar waxwing. Remember we said that was smaller than a robin, larger than a sparrow. What a beautiful bird, right? It has this little kind of red sealing wax look here. And you'll see cedar waxwings if you're near plants that have berries, different time of the year, all through the winter. So birds can't live on turf grass or pachysandra or boxwood, right? So healthyyards.org is your great resource for that, not just for birds, but butterflies and pollinators. Also plants for birds. You can put in a zip code and see what plants are good in your area. And the interesting thing, if you want to do one thing, you could add water. right? Because birds actually have to wash their feathers all winter long because they get gunky and they need the loft, both for flying, they need them fluffy to keep themselves warm. So they will bathe even on the coldest days. So the big thing is we just got to keep changing what we're putting on the ground. All these companies that say, oh, healthy tick control, organic tick control, that's so bogus. Anything that kills ticks is also killing other invertebrate that birds need to raise their young. So we got to use some other practices to keep the ticks away besides spraying poisons, because we don't want this. It's a dead bluebird. So healthyyards.org. So a lot of actions you can do to help birds. And one thing I hope you can do as we come into a home stretch here, if you have any influence on those black boxes, do you know what I mean? The black boxes that people put around foundations of companies and schools and stores, they have rat poison in them. And rat poison doesn't just kill rats. There are other solutions because we don't want to keep killing our owls. We picked up a bald eagle this past year. We picked up a red-tailed hawk this past year at Croton Point, both of which were sick from rat poison. So Raptors Are the Solution. I like this website. It's an acronym for rats. You get that, yeah? Raptors Are the Solution. This is controversial. When I grew up, we let our cats out. That's what we did. Even when I moved to this Audubon sanctuary, I had cats I let out. But we can't do it anymore. We're running out of birds, and the impact is bigger than we ever imagined. Even a really well-fed cat, it's like dragging a string across the floor when they see a little fluttery fledgling. And birds don't fly the first few days out of the nest. Huge mortality from cats. Tough topic, but true. So a big thing you can do, and here we're going to talk about the Great Backyard Bird Count as a finale coming up here, is you can do citizen science. You can help keep track of the birds by counting them. And this is how birding makes a difference. And this is the report that came out right before the pandemic that absolutely stunned the scientific world. They did a compilation of a lot of the bird data across North America and compared the data from 1970 to 2017. And the numbers had crashed, even on common birds. So we're missing 2.9 billion birds. It was like sort of anecdotal up to that point, and then people are like, oh my goodness, we got to turn this thing around. So 3billionbirds.org, it's on your resource sheet, gives you a lot of ideas how you can help, and you can help track. And it's birds in all habitats, whether the shore, the Arctic, the desert, grasslands. And this is the story, right? And we'll get to the end here pretty nearly. Some of you know the expression canary in a coal mine, and it's a true story. Birds have a faster metabolism. Remember all those air sacs? They breathe fast. They exchange air much quicker than humans. And so before all the electronic gizmos and gadgets and gauges, miners literally took canaries into mines because they would breathe air faster than the humans. And if the air was starting to go bad, they would show the effects sooner, even falling off their perch, and the humans would know they needed to get out of there. True story. So birds are like that for us in the environment. If they're not doing well, we're not going to do well. So we need to keep track. It has to do with climate as well. And the tagline here is birds tell us. Birds are adapting as fast as they can to climate change. They are shifting their ranges as fast as they can. It's hard data. It's easily observed data. Remember, birds are the easiest to observe wildlife on the planet. So they tell us the stories. And how do we know that? Because we've been counting them for decades. Audubon groups and birders have been keeping data records for decades, for centuries in some cases. A lot of those are at ebird.org. And you can actually go explore at ebird.org. It's all free open source data. You can click explore, put in a county like Westchester, and you can bring up sightings up to the last hour or two. People submit checklists. These are all birder checklists, and you can click on them and you can actually see some of them have pictures that were submitted. Here's a friend of mine, Mitchell Goldfarb, who submitted a list this Saturday at Croton Point, and he also included some pictures in that he took. These are all birds he saw at Croton Point this Saturday, and he saw some kestrels. Isn't that a great picture? This robin-sized falcon. So with that data, we were able to go to county parks and say, hey, that grassland up there is a pretty big deal. And could we do some better protection on it? And it actually helped to make a difference for that habitat there. And you can see that on some signs up there that we put up. So you can make a difference too. Check out birdcount.org. It's this coming weekend. The most important thing you can do is to remember the where and the when of birding, of bird ID. Don't report birds that are only found in Oregon, right? I mean, rare birds happen, but they're rare. And then think about birds that are here in the winter, not birds that are here in June. And there's a great free webinar coming up to help teach you about that. So if you go to birdcount.org, you'll see this graphic and you can click on that. That's coming up Wednesday. I think it's recorded too. And so resources, check out that sheet. If you don't have it, you'll get it, I know. And it's all clickable. So all these links I mentioned, you can click on them. It replacing a lot of field guides now are the birding apps, right? And there's a lot of apps out there, but there's really only one you should start with or have to begin with birding or go a little deeper. And that's the Merlin app. It's totally free, Merlin. It comes from Cornell Lab, has more than 400 North American birds on it. And it does amazing things. It can listen with you and tell you what birds it's hearing. It'll ask you the same questions we did in tonight's program: sparrow, robin, crow, goose. And while it listens, you tell it where you are and when you are, and it'll give you a good guess on what you're hearing by IDing the sound. Cool, right? And it does the same thing with those questions because it knows where you are and when you are. It'll ask you questions about color, size, and what the bird's doing. Same things we talked about, behavior. And it'll give you possibilities. And lastly, you can feed it a photo, crop it in, and it'll ID the photo if it knows where you are and when you are. Give you some possibilities. So definitely get Merlin. Check out that website. The one website that you really want to bookmark is All About Birds. That'll get you to Merlin. That'll get you to Feeder Watch. It'll get you to the Great Backyard Bird Count, and also link you with some live feeder cams and nest cams from around the world. And don't forget the organic resources, right? All the different clubs and groups that connect people with nature, particularly Bronx River Sound Shore. So last quote that was inside that field guide: birds contribute to our pleasure, but they're also indicators of the environment, right? So people that watch birds get more environmentally aware of seasons and habitat and for the future. Thank you. So we got time for questions. We did pretty well there. Good.
Okay. We got a few questions here. Hold on. So you said the count was on the 11th and the webinar is on the 16th. So people can start counting tomorrow?
No, I'm sorry. Did I have the wrong dates there?
You said the 11th to the 14th.
I think I must have had the wrong dates on this slide. I'm terribly sorry.
Oh, okay.
No, wait. It's usually over the 3-day weekend, but maybe it's not. Okay. Maybe it's later. Oh yeah, no, it's the following weekend. So okay. I beg your pardon. It's the 3-day weekend. So 18, 19, 20, 21, you know, the Monday holiday weekend. Okay. So Wednesday before is the webinar. Pardon me, I'll correct that. Yeah, go to birdcount.org. You'll have the up-to-date correct info.
Okay. Someone wants to know, a blue jay born in our backyard 3 years ago, do they come back every year?
Yeah, they have site fidelity, it's called. But if the parents still have that territory, the young bird has to set up its own territory and find its own mate, just like moving out of the house, right? So there's a particular amount of land that they defend with sound in the spring, sound fence, their songs and behavior. So it's not going to live in the same territory as its parents, but it might live in like a rose petal off to the side, you know, an adjacent circle or so, rough circle.
And they want to know why these birds come to the yard on some days and not show up for a week.
Yeah, interesting. Some of that has to do with what other restaurant is in the area. I don't know if you're talking about feeders being empty sometimes. I don't know if she feeders or not. Sometimes feeders are empty because there's a sharpshin or Cooper's hawk sitting in a tree over your house and you don't see it, but the birds do. So they'll just wait. A lot of times, sometimes you look out and you'll see like a bird frozen at the feeder, a downy, just like frozen on the suet log. And that's because there is an accipiter nearby and it's being very still. Yeah.
And someone wants to know, do birds grow more feathers in the winter? And do they look bigger when they're cold? Oh yeah, good observation that they look bigger when they're cold. That's because they fluff themselves up. I don't think they increase the number of feathers in the winter,
That's an interesting question. I don't think so. Because they can adjust their temperature by how fluffed up or thin their feathers are, whether they're pressed against their skin or they're really puffed up. And good for you to notice that in our bitter temps of the last couple of weeks, people noticed fluffy birds. Yeah.
Why did Rat Island have so much rat poison and the birds didn't eat any of that rat poison? I don't know if you know.
Strange question. Yeah. Yeah, on an island, there's a whole nother science about island biogeography. And we kind of disrupted a lot of islands by species that we brought there. Hawaii is an example of that. It's lost a lot of its native species to rats and mongoose. Yeah, I don't know that birds would have any interest in rat poison, actually. Birds eat what their bill, their gut, and their bodies are designed to eat, right? So,
Okay.
yeah.
For the count, do we just identify the species or must we provide how many as with geese or sparrows?
I think you also do a count. You do an estimate on a count, and you also can tick off. It depends how you want to play. And that is a really basic question that I don't know the answer of. See, I eBird every day. So I don't know if they changed the protocol for bird count, to be honest with you. And I should know that. But the ID, there's all kinds of tips, and that webinar will help you out too. All kinds of tips on how to ID birds and how to participate. I'm going to check that out. Excuse me. Other questions? Or
yeah. Are there any rookeries in Westchester in the spring?
Yeah, there's quite a few. And great blue heron rookeries. There are places where night herons nest. Yeah, so what you do is you watch birds for 15 minutes or more over the 4 days, February 18th to 21. Count all the birds you see or hear within your planned time or location. And yeah, cool. That's how you do it. All the birds you see or hear. There are rookeries. We're kind of careful about how much we publicize nesting places of birds, aren't we? Or roosting owls, because some people aren't careful. They get really focused on getting the picture, and they may chase the birds away. Some people, so really good photographers know as soon as a bird or other wildlife is reacting to you, turning its head, shuffling its feet, you're too close. If it's already reacting to your presence, you're too close. So you have to pull back. And that's hard for people trying to get a picture. You know, I've seen people try to take pictures of snowy owls with their phone camera, and they just walk right up to it, right? And that's no good, because those birds are often very tired and they need to rest. But there's some great places to observe birds. Good place to see some birds that are in rookeries, if not the rookery itself. A lot of the wading birds, a good place, of course, is marshlands, if you're not familiar with that. That's an excellent place. We have some walks at marshlands. Also around Edith Reed Sanctuary and Playland Lake. There's some great observation there too, right? And around Larchmont Reservoir. Yeah. Other questions, comments?
Is there a hierarchy at the bird feeder?
Definitely. And that's a really great thing to watch, to see which birds don't budge no matter what comes in, and what birds just scatter the flock when they land. And a funny thing to watch for is blue jays give that jay call as an alarm call, that jay, when they see a fox or coyote or a cat outside or a hawk, they'll give that call, and the other birds pay attention, and they'll stop what they're doing and look around to see what the jay sees, right? But sometimes I've seen jays do that, and right when they want a feeder to empty out, they'll fly above a feeder and they'll give the alarm call, and the little birds will leave the feeder and the jay will sail right in, which is pretty funny to watch. It sounds anecdotal or anthropomorphic, but they do use that technique sometime.
Okay. Why do some birds collect in groups while others don't?
That's an interesting question. I guess it has to do with how they make their way in the world. It is an advantage to be in a flock, and in the winter, some birds like chickadee, titmice, nuthatch, downy woodpeckers will travel through the forest in a loose flock, because there's more eyes and ears, right? There's a lot of advantage to being in a flock. But during most of the year, they're not in a flock. They're in their own territories raising their young. So there's a lot of different strategies they do for that. Yeah. Sometimes we see birds in larger numbers just because they're all using the same migratory space or same habitat space, but they're not really a flock. So lots of possibilities there. Yeah.
Do you think the ivory-billed woodpecker still exists?
I hope so. I don't know. I think it's queued up to be listed as officially extinct shortly. I think I heard that they were actually going to open those hearings or whatever. There are some true believers. It's hard to imagine that we would have missed it, but I hope there's still some around. There was a population in eastern Cuba at one point, but there hasn't been any reports there. Yeah. What's that, Western Cuba? I don't know.
Anyway, oh, sorry. Anyway, I can feed birds on my terrace, which is 1 story up.
Sure. A big thing is you want to keep seed from falling down, right? So you want to use get what's called some of those no mess mixes. They actually sell something called a patio mix that has no shells. And you want a tray that has a good big, you want a feeder that has a big catch tray underneath it. So, because birds are always tossing seeds around when they're at the feeder. So you want a big catch tray underneath, which can double as a baffle, which Paul and I were talking about before. A baffle is a lot of times on a feeder to keep things from coming up the pole or the feeder attachment like squirrels. So yeah, think about that. Talk to wild bird stores about that. You know, do some work online. There's definitely solutions for that if your building or whatever allows it. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. People are saying thank you, and people say I want more. I'm greedy. So
That's great. Yeah, no, it's so much fun. Yeah, so we have other Zooms, and I know you do too. So check us out. Check out Bronx River BRSS Audubon has some good Zooms coming up. We have a Zoom on just about raptors called Raptors for Rookies that you can probably find online, and some others. So great. It's a great pleasure. A lot of fun.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks everyone for joining us, and everyone have a good night.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.
That was a big help. All right.
Thank you.